Hello again, this is Michael from TOEFLresources.com, and today I want to talk about some changes to the speaking and writing sections of the TOEFL that you can expect to see in 2019. Now, before I begin, I must mention that these changes are fairly small, and they are also changes that I've noticed over the course of 2018. So if you've taken the test already, you may have already seen some of them. But I want to present this video because these are the sorts of things that don't really appear in most of the modern TOEFL textbooks or on a lot of TOEFL websites. So, getting started, first of all, the multiple choice independent speaking questions are getting longer and more confusing. Now, what does this mean? Well, let's take a look at an example. Here's a question that was reported to me recently. Which of the following companies would you prefer to work for? A company that offers you challenging and interesting projects, but very few vacation days? Or a company that offers you a job with very boring work each day, but very long vacations each year? Include details and examples to support your choice. Now, as you can see, each of the two options is a very long sentence. In the past, the options would be fairly short sentences or even just a couple of words. These new questions are designed to be a lot more confusing and to require greater English skills than before. Here's another one. Imagine that you have just begun studying at a new university. Which of the following do you think would be the best way for you to learn about the new campus? A second-year student gives you a personal tour of the whole campus. You are given a detailed map of the campus designed by the Student Services Department. You join a group tour of the campus together with all of the other new students. Include details and examples to support your choice. Now, this one is really long, but it is very similar to a question that a student of mine faced just about a month ago. It is basically a lot more difficult than questions that were used in the past. It requires greater understanding. It requires greater comprehension. It requires you to pay a lot more attention to the prompt. Indeed, the student who reported this to me, he actually kind of panicked when he heard it. And he wasn't able to actually remember all three of the options. That's because he was really surprised. The question just didn't match what he had been studying in textbooks and websites. Now, the technique to answer these questions is the same as it's always been. I'll put a link in the video description to my previous video, which will give you a template and a structure to answer these questions. So you're doing it the same way, it's just going to be a lot more difficult. Now, I should mention here that a lot of students really like to use the first sentence of their answer to sort of paraphrase or summarize the question prompt. When you've got such a long question, though, that's almost impossible to do very quickly. By the time you finish restating the question, you'll already have lost 15 or 20 seconds. So don't do that. That's not a technique that I've ever really taught, but a lot of students do like it. But I'm telling you, if you get a really long question, it's an especially bad idea. All right, moving on to the next change. It's about advantages and disadvantages style questions. They are still here and they are trickier than ever. Now, before I give you the change, I should mention that this is a fairly new style of question. I did mention it in my earlier video about the type 1 and type 2 questions, but it is new, and the advantages, disadvantages questions are not really mentioned in most TOEFL textbooks at this time. But the thing is, they are still here and they are getting harder than ever. Here's a recent question that a student reported to me. Some teachers prefer announcing their quizzes in advance, while others prefer to give surprise quizzes. Talk about the advantages and disadvantages of surprise quizzes. Use details and examples in your answer. Now, the tricky part is that the question gives you two things, right? It mentions announcing quizzes in advance, and it also mentions giving surprise quizzes. But you are supposed to only talk about the advantages and disadvantages of surprise quizzes. So you've got to focus only on the one they tell you to. Previously, they might have only given you one thing. They might simply have said, some teachers really like surprise quizzes. Talk about the advantages and disadvantages of these surprise quizzes. That's a little bit easier. This one requires you to pay better attention, and it requires greater comprehension of the question prompt. Now, the technique for answering this remains the same, and my link will give you a structure that you can use in your answer. Just be prepared and don't panic if you get a slightly more confusing question than you expected. Last change. You can now get 25 points in the speaking section. Now, mathematically, this used to be impossible. I don't understand anything about math, so I can't tell you exactly why, but it used to be related to the way that the raw score out of 4 was converted to the scaled score out of 30 and about rounding. And so you could never get 25 points. That was a long-standing rule. And if you look in the official textbook and you find that chart of all the average scores in all the countries and for different genders and ages, no one would get 25. They would just leave that part blank in the chart. Now, however, something has changed and you can get 25 points. That's nice. Some universities still have this requirement that you get 25 points in the speaking section of the TOEFL. Well, that was kind of funny, because what it really meant was, well, you better get 26 points. Now, however, you can meet that requirement exactly. I hope that's easier. I hope this means that the test is a little bit easier for students. I don't know for sure, though, because I don't understand the math. Just don't be surprised if you get 25 points exactly. All right, moving on to the writing section of the test. I need to tell you that independent writing prompts are also getting longer and more confusing. Here's an example. Consider a situation where you are asked by your supervisor to participate in a group project at work. Your supervisor wants you to work with someone who has opinions that are very different than yours. Moreover, they feel very strongly about these opinions. Do you think this is a good idea? Use reasons and examples to support your answer. So here you've got 3 long sentences, and then you got this stuff at the bottom that never really changes. That's a lot of reading to do. That's a lot of comprehension that is required. It's simply a lot more difficult than it used to be. Older tests would just have, a couple sentences. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? It is better to work in groups than to work alone. Use reasons and examples to support your answer. You might get something short like that. But on the other hand, you might get something long and complicated. Once again, the method of writing the essay hasn't really changed. You're still going to use the same structure. But it's just going to be a lot more difficult for you to actually understand what you are supposed to write. Don't panic. Don't be surprised. Just prepare for a long answer and be prepared to read it very carefully. Here's another one. You are planning to donate money to a charity and want it to have the most impact. Should you donate to a small local group or to a large international organization? Provide reasons and details to support your opinion. This is a little bit shorter than the previous one, but it's still pretty long. It still requires a fair bit of reading and comprehension. It is still more difficult than what you might have gotten in 2017 or in much of 2018. Now remember, the 30-minute timer starts counting down as soon as the writing prompt is on the screen. So you might spend a minute reading the prompt even before you start writing or planning. Be prepared for that, and when you're writing your practice essays, really incorporate that into your routine. That might mean writing a shorter essay than usual. Keep that in mind. Another one of my students really panicked because they had their writing process down to 2 minutes for planning, 3 minutes for introduction, 9 minutes for body 1, and so on. And they had used that plan in all of their practice essays, and then when they get to the test center, suddenly they've lost 2 minutes just reading the question, and it really threw off their routine. I don't want that to happen to you. Be prepared for a long, confusing writing prompt. All right, that's all that I've heard about recently as far as changes to the test goes, but if you've heard anything new or you've experienced something new, please leave a comment below and let everybody know. For more of this kind of stuff, you can find me at TOEFLresources.com. If you go to that site, you can read detailed guides to the speaking and writing sections of the test. You can read some sample essays, and you can sign up to have your essays or speaking responses scored and evaluated by me. All right, I'm going to leave it at that, but thanks very much, guys, and I can't wait to see you again real soon.